New hierarchy. Okay.
Great. Thank you so much, Mingwei. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yeah.
Great. Excellent. So hi, everyone. My name is Christophe Combemale. I'm a doctoral, or postdoc, sorry, recently defended. So I'm now a postdoc at Carnegie Mellon University. And today I'm going to be presenting a paper with Kate Whitefoot on new technology, new hierarchy, implications of technology change for the division of problem solving. So to give you just a bit of theoretical background, we have a really rich literature that thinks about production issues, whether that's in a service context, a manufacturing context, a intellectual product design work context, where things go wrong. Issues come up, something does not go according to plan, and someone has to solve that issue. Work, for instance, by Garicano and Rossi Hansberg in the mid-2000s, or by Descent and Santos, thinks about how the organization of those issues leads to the development of vertical hierarchies within an organization, right? I solve an easy issue, you solve a hard issue, and a hierarchy is formed between us in terms of managerial responsibility and usually in terms of pay as well. Within this literature, there's a tendency to think about technology change affecting the cost of different organizational structures. It can also change what kinds of issues we have to solve, right? Automation produces new kinds of production issues we didn't have to deal with before. Within this context, there's a very rich literature coming mostly out of economics, but also in discussions from sociology around the idea that tasks have multiple characteristics that are of relevance, that are affected by technology change, and that can drive skill-biased outcomes. Right. This is, for instance, the famous story about routine-biased technology change. My work is routine, so it's more likely to be automated, and thus I'm more likely to lose my employment. Another important dimension of the literature that we bring in this paper is the idea of multidimensional ability. Right. There's a common tendency in economics, which is economics and engineering and public policy is my background, to really think in terms of unidimensional measures. Right. We think about education. We think about proxies on wages, things like that, very unidimensional. But of course, there's a whole rich literature that shows us that there are lots of different kinds of abilities, and that capturing those different abilities and how they are affected differently by new technology is really important to understanding social outcomes of interest, like occupational skill bias. So what's missing from these three strands is a theory that allows us to unify the technological effects on managerial hierarchy, so how we divide within a firm, and on the scope of work, which is going to be how we solve the assignment of production issues to different people and in what order they're supposed to solve them. So the unanswered questions we're going to be looking at today are: how do different technologies affect the division of problem solving? And what is the effect of this division on inequality and occupational demand? So our research question, we're going to look at industrial context in optoelectronic semiconductors. This is based off of work that I did several years ago with Whitefoot, Alice, and Fuchs. We've gone back to this data set and collected data from 11 different firms on several hundred different production process steps to characterize the managerial hierarchies on the shop floor, but also in product design. And the technological context we're looking at here is there are two technologies happening simultaneously. One is automation. The other is parts consolidation, which is going to be when formerly discrete components in semiconductor devices are merged together. And this is going to create new interdependencies. It's going to change the scope of work that is technically feasible, how I can break up work between two different people. And it's going to mean that different kinds of production issues now cost more than they used to. And so these two technologies are going to be really important as drivers of changes in organizational hierarchy and income inequality within the firm. Just to give you a quick notion of our empirics, we're still doing analysis on this. So today I'm going to be focusing mostly on a formal model, but I'll show you some of the empirical work that we've done closer to the end. We collected data from these 11 firms on 11 different occupations, from shop floor workers to design engineers. We characterized operational content for 90 production steps, or more than 90 production steps, and 100 steps involved in process and product design. So what we're really trying to do here is capture this phenomenon as broadly as possible, And we use the ONET skill instrument to capture a large variety of skill measures at every single process step. ONET is traditionally at the occupation level. We go down to the level of individual process steps to measure these relationships. And we also created a novel design survey in order to build, we believe for the first time, a production style operations model of design work in order to characterize hierarchies and issue assignment within product design, getting away from sort of a manufacturing focused view. So a stylized example of what we find in the vertical division of labor within a step, there are three major elements we're going to want to keep in our minds here. The first is hierarchy. So in this stylized example, a machine solves a problem before a technician or an operator. If something goes wrong, a little light goes on, that's a referral. The operator comes in and works on that problem as well. And on it goes until someone can solve the problem. There are alternative structures, which we intend to explore in extensions. Issues are the things that operate through the hierarchy. They move through the hierarchy. An issue arises, it is detected, and it moves up the hierarchy. And scope is going to be capturing what share of a worker's time or a performer's time is dedicated to solving issues in one production step versus another. Do I always solve the same kinds of issues, or am I moving across lots of different issues? So our starting point for characterizing this phenomenon, and I have 15 minutes, so I'm going to move quickly through the math. I'm not gonna bore anyone, but basically we're thinking about a firm that minimizes the cost of production by choosing how to break tasks into steps and who to assign to those steps. So you think of a large interval of tasks, I choose how much I'm going to break it up, and I choose who does what within those production steps that are formed. And this is going to motivate for the firm cost minimizing decisions around when to use machines, when to use humans. And it's going to help us think about how new technology changes the problem of the firm and leads to different demand for workers and hence different outcomes for economic inequality. So to give you just a visual example, here's a very simple example of this continuum of tasks, this 0 to V bar. The firm is going to place a step threshold. It's going to create two different steps. These steps are going to have a length in terms of the number of tasks that they contain. Longer steps are going to be more complex. They're going to have more issues. A longer step is going to be more difficult to solve because more issues will arise and they will tend to be of a higher magnitude. Humans and machines are different from each other in this context in that machines can work faster than humans, but humans are more sensitive or less sensitive to this complexity. We can solve lots of different problems. Machines tend to have difficulty solving many different problems. So that's the sort of basic instrument. We break up production and we assign it to performers. Where hierarchy comes in, and I should be clear, this is based off of previous work done with Alice, Whitefoot, and Fuchs. This new work that Katie Whitefoot and I are doing together is thinking about breaking up a step vertically. So I've broken up my production, I have a process step, and now I decide how to build that hierarchy that I showed you a stylized example of before. So I'm going to decide how many layers phi to have. I'm going to decide the level of ability of workers in each layer. By construction, an issue is going to go to the first layer and then move its way up until someone can solve it. And this is going to mean that my level of ability is going to be increasing as I move up the hierarchy. The firm is going to save by making these layers by matching performers to the level of difficulty. If I'm very high ability, you only want me solving the hardest issues. And so you don't want me solving easier issues. You would like there to be layers of workers who can solve those issues for me and refer them to me only when they're most expensive. So that's the motivation for breaking up hierarchies, for creating hierarchies. It's so that you don't have overqualified performers doing easy things. However, there are costs. There is a referral cost every time I try to move something up, right? I need to explain what went wrong to the next person. And there's also just idle costs, right? If you give me work that I can never solve, and my job is just to hand it up to the next person, then I'm not going to be productive. So there's going to be a trade-off happening here, which is I'm going to be trading off the cost of referring up the hierarchy versus matching my performers to the level of difficulty. So that's the big decision that I'm going to be making here. How much do I break up my hierarchy? And then how different are the layers in terms of the level of ability of the workers within them. I mentioned to you that there was going to be an effective scope. I'm going to keep it quick because I think I'm running out of time here. The general idea here is that there are different types of tasks within a step that can emerge. Each type of task could be social, could be physical, we could break it down much more finely, is going to have different qualities. There might, for instance, be tasks like social tasks where the variance of the issues is going to be much higher. There's a lot more things that can go differently when I'm dealing with a social problem than with a physical problem. And there are different levels of ability required for each. And so this is going to motivate decisions about scope. If I'm a high social ability worker, do you also need me to be a high physical ability worker, or can that be broken up? And this is going to help us think about specialization among workers and across occupations. So to give you something to sort of hang on to here, this is an empirical result that we have. We're charting on the axes the level of dexterity and operations and control skill as captured using the ONET survey instrument for different steps. We are consolidating production, so it's now more costly to divide work. And so we're looking at the skill set of a worker. Where does a worker in these bubbles, larger bubbles means more workers, fall within this sort of universe of possible skills? And what we see as we consolidate is we move closer onto this main diagonal. In other words, you're getting fewer specialists. And what this tells us is that there are technological changes that can encourage broad-based skill sets. I don't have time to show you, but automation, perhaps not surprisingly, has the opposite effect. It leads to movement off the main diagonal. You have people who are much more specialized in terms of their skills, with much less broad-based skills available to them. How do we use this model? What is informative about this model? Well, there's a few things. The first is that when work passes from one layer to the next, there's going to be a threshold, right? The threshold is how hard a problem can the first layer solve. And so choosing when you refer up to the next threshold is essentially a choice about the difference in ability level between your performers in the first and second layers. The difference in ability level will also mean a difference in wages and inequality to follow. What's very interesting and maybe a little counterintuitive coming out of the model is that as your performers become more flexible, meaning they can go do other kinds of work, inequality within these steps is actually going to go up. Essentially, my ability to be reallocated is going to be associated with my level of inequality. And what's going on here is if I cannot be reallocated as a senior manager, it means that I'm now dedicated to this one step, which means I need to do much more of the work in that step, or rather, to make the most out of my capacity, you want me to be doing much more of the work in that step. And so you're going to be pushing down the responsibilities of workers lower in the hierarchy. Also, not surprisingly, is that as I refer more, as referral costs increase, I'm going to refer less to senior managers. And so workers are going to be more responsible. So that second result is not surprising. That comes out of the literature very naturally. But the first one is something very new and I think quite interesting, that managerial flexibility can have an implication on worker inequality.
Okay, 2 minutes left.
What was that, Mingwei?
2 minutes left.
Perfect, that's great timing. Last analytical result is, I mentioned there are different kinds of tasks and they can have different levels of variance. This is adapted from my work in Combemale, Alice, Whitefoot, and Fuchs 2022. We showed a cone of automation in a variety of industries wherein the step length or the level of worker ability that was susceptible to automation was different depending on production volume. What was happening here is essentially at low volumes, machines were very competitive with middle skill workers because they could work faster than them, but they were not competitive with low skill workers or low wage workers because they tended to perform very simple steps and the machine could not be reallocated easily, whereas a human could be. So again, worker flexibility made a real difference. As your volume increases, the machine's reallocation cost doesn't matter anymore, right? It can just keep doing the same thing and never run out of things to do. What we find now, this further extension, is this result gets stronger depending on the variability of the task you assign. If tasks have very high variance, if there's lots of issues that you have to solve of different magnitudes, automation has a reduced effect on inequality. Automation drives lesser polarization of wages, which is another, I think, very compelling result that we don't see very much in the economics literature. So to summarize some preliminary insights from the model, we've shown that inequality within employee hierarchies, yes, it's a choice that the firm makes, right? They choose how they're going to break up production, but that choice can be informed by technology. If I change the parameters of the problem in terms of the cost of referral through telecommunications technology, or if I develop a technology that allows managers to be more flexible, I change the level of inequality within my hierarchy. Flexible management can reduce inequality, and automation can be less polarizing, meaning also less driving of inequality when production issues are varied. Next steps will be empirical evaluation. We do not have yet full empirical results to show you, but I would, of course, encourage everyone to stay tuned, and I'm happy to send a future version of the paper to anyone who's interested. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. Right on time. The second presentation is Justin Vinton from Rutgers University. It's the title of the paper is the Middle Management Implementation of Labor Management Partnership at the unit level.
Hi, can everyone hear me and see my slides?
Yes, good.
Great. Let me just get set here. Okay. So thanks everyone for coming. This is part of my work that I've been working on for my dissertation and also stem from my master's thesis. So this is kind of a 3-year-long project. It's really looking at this kind of fundamental, it's an empirical example of the fundamental issue in IR, this debate between the institutionalist perspective and the unitarist perspective. And it kind of plays out in the form of labor management partnership and collaborative leadership. So what I think is unique about this study is that I'm applying this method called qualitative comparative analysis. So the way I want to structure this talk is to kind of go through my research question, and then briefly, I don't want to take up too much time in the method itself of QCA, but I do think there's some background that is necessary for you to know in order to understand what's going on. So I'll discuss a little bit about it and why I'm using it to begin with. So yeah, like I mentioned, this institutionalist versus unitarist perspectives of labor, of collaboration. Partnership is institutionalist. It comes from tradition in industrial relations. It's structures and process designed for a vehicle for employee voice through unions. So unions are kind of the core of this. Collaborative leadership, on the other hand, is a kind of from the HR literature, the unitarist perspective. And I'm looking at unit level effects here. So and within school districts, so I'm looking at principles, and that is the personal and individual relations at the unit level that can encourage collaboration voice. So these are the kind of 2 ways to encourage voice. One is from collaborative leadership, the other is from partnership. And I'm kind of looking at the interplay between these 2 phenomena. But both perspectives, the issue here, have mixed findings for employees and organizations. I mean, partnership has been known to be abandoned and fail even. That there's mixed results for employees and organizations. And that goes for, high performance work systems, strategic human resource management practices, which again, take the form of a unitarist perspective. Other research has shown that unions can mitigate these negative effects of an HR system like high involvement work systems. And then and I think this kind of directly relates to my question here, is there's a recent study by Eaton that showed that formal participatory structures like partnership or a unit-based team may actually impede informal participation that has already been existing in an organization. So leaders may have already been encouraging this in an organization, and this formal structure that is put on top of it may actually mitigate those effects from the informal participation. So there's this issue of causal complexity, right? So is it partnership or is it collaborative leadership? And that's kind of the main question empirically I'm looking at to answer this institutionalist versus unitarist perspective. And I don't have a definitive answer, but this is the question I'm exploring. I think I have hints to where it might go. So are there diverging or complementary effects on the desired outcomes, which again, I'm looking at voice and collaboration here. So yes, I mean, the hypothesis I have, the way I'm thinking about this is that they should be complementary, but we can see a little bit and tease that out because I can address the causal complexity using QCA. It's growingly popular in as a configurational set method in social sciences. It addresses causal complexity, as I mentioned. It helps determine necessity and sufficiency of conditions, which is a different terminology for saying variables. I'll probably interchange them throughout this, and their combinations in producing an outcome. And that means that it's configurational. It doesn't look at isolated variables that can get to one path like a regression analysis or correlational method. It can look at things in conjunction. So it's equifinal, meaning that there are multiple paths to the same outcome. And it's also asymmetrical, meaning that X, variable X, can lead to Y, does not necessarily mean that not having variable X does not lead to Y, which is what a correlation would kind of show you. And the conditions and variables can be defined through mixed methods, mix of survey items, which is what I do here, and as well as qualitative interviews. And I don't have a representative or random sample. I'm kind of sampling on the dependent variable here, which is okay in this because normal distributions are not assumptions and it's not a non-parametric method. So this is, again, I won't go too much into this. I'm going to stick to the third column here. What QCA actually does, it's a combination of quantitative and qualitative methods. So it's inductive as well as deductive. It looks at complex causality. It looks at case-based and it's comparative. It usually looks at a small to medium n size, which I have an n size of 13, which is perfect for this. It's extensive and intensive, whereas qualitative is one or the other, and quantitative. And it has both within and cross case analysis. So I have a within case, we have within cases that I've looked at, which are schools in this case, as well as across cases, across schools. So it's a bridge essentially to these both of these methods. So to getting into the actual study, my design is at the unit level. So I'm looking at schools and education. My measures, which are conditions again, are adapted from a school district survey, as well as interviews over 70 educators across 13 school districts that have adopted a labor management partnership. So that's where the union is acting as a vehicle for teachers to exert their voice throughout this, from the classroom to the school district level. And I collected these data from spring of 2018 to spring of 2021, so 3 years. I have before, during, and after, because COVID is still kind of with us, data from all of these kind of time periods. And then we have a quantitative survey that was administered from fall 2021 to spring of 2022 across those 13 schools, and that's combined of over 700 teachers and staff. So as I mentioned, QCA was originally designed for these medium sized N studies, which is 13 right here, and I can leverage my deep case knowledge to kind of create these conditions. So one of the questions back to this issue of complex causality is a common statement from interviews I've always gotten from principals and as well as even teachers in some schools was that I'm already collaborative. So what a lot of times they would say that, what is partnership going to do that I'm already not doing? And I think there is an answer to that, but that was their perspective. And some teachers happen to agree with these principles across schools. So what primarily drives these desired outcomes? Is it formal institution of partnership, or is it kind of the personal and individual collaborative leadership from a principal, which I'm looking at as a middle manager? Or is it both? Are they complementary? So I kind of want to run through this quickly. These are the measures I got. It's a teacher, it was the individual level survey, and I'm aggregating within districts, and I'm aggregating them to the school level. So this is just essentially my justification for this. So I measure partnership on a labor management partnership process quality scale, collaborative leadership. There's two measures I hear, which is use here, which is managerial open to voice. And empowering leadership. I can get into this as well, but if you want to in the Q&A, and I'm happy to talk offline to talk about justification, but all of them meet the criteria. And then the other ones I'm looking at are the quality of principal school union leader relationship. So this relationship I found, especially in qualitative work, and we have a survey measure on it, is that the union leader within the school and the principal, that relationship was a key to kind of having an outcome of teacher voice. And then district level support is obviously important. And this is, I have to kind of make a note here, this is coded as one being, it's kind of a binary variable here, that there's both the union president in the district, which is a district leader for the union, and the superintendent both support it, because in some cases it was one or the other, and that doesn't have a full level of support. So that's how I coded that condition. And again, the outcomes, which again, there are issues with these outcomes because they're kind of highly correlated with a lot of the independent variables. I'm looking to get more outcome data that's more concrete and looking at student performance and or turnover, grievance rates. But right now I'm looking at voice. So teachers, faculty, and school administration work together on innovations to improve teaching and learning is one of the items there. And then also, I wasn't originally planning on doing this, but I added in a school level response to COVID variable, which is essentially voice during crisis, which again is measured as school level decision-making around COVID-19 has been collaborative between teachers and administrators regarding the transition to remote and hybrid learning. So really looking, and these were all, this survey was fielded in from fall of 2021 to a couple months ago. So this is actually capturing, that time period. So this is just essentially an empty table that I will fill, but this is essentially showing on the left column here, you have all the conditions that I described in the measurements. The two on the top are institutional, their partnership and district support. And then the other one that are kind of represent collaborative leadership are openness to employee voice, empowering leadership, and that relationship between the principal and the union school leader. And again, I'm looking at these two outcomes here of voice and COVID-19 response at the school level. So again, I don't want to get too much into the weeds about how to calibrate. It's what it's called. It's essentially a method for coding. But essentially, you can convert these 7-point Likert scales from the survey and make different decisions using theory, as well as the empirical cases and knowing the cases well, to show what cutoff points are a membership in a condition. So like a school might let's just say, for example, one of the survey measures was, a 5 out of a 7-point scale, which is what the survey was. This would just be kind of converted in a logistic form, log formation between 0 and 1, and above 0.5 is the threshold to, denote membership within that condition. So if it's above 0.5, it is technically, has that condition of whatever variable that is, and it's below 0.5, it's technically out of that. And I can show that kind of numeric, or from my preliminary fuzzy set results from the truth table. So before that, sorry, let me just talk about this. So that's kind of, I'm not getting into the truth table because it's very kind of long here. The way that QCA works is that it's 2 to the power of how many conditions you have is the amount of configurations that actually are shown. And that is even those that may not be empirically present, which is an example of limited diversity. So what's cool about QCA is that you can look, there's ways to have parsimonious solutions based on the actual empirical instances of, what these 13 schools, what they present and what conditions they are in. There's a way to eliminate redundancies, and using counterfactual analysis, which is done in this software, that can just pretty much show you the main paths and the most appropriate paths to a certain outcome. And I'll show you right now that this is essentially what I'm talking about. So this is the preliminary results I'm looking at from the truth table. And so there's 5 outcomes, right? There's 1 path to voice. No, there's 3 paths to voice, I'm sorry. And there's 2 paths to COVID-19 response from the school level. So what this table means here is that the black dots represent whether there's membership in that set. So for example, in the first voice column, partnership was present. The circle means that district support was not present. Openness is something called, it's considered a don't care, meaning it could be, it could be in or it could be out. that's kind of getting into the weeds of QCA analysis, which I'm happy to talk about later. Empowering leadership, so it is present in this, and relationship between the principal and the school union rep is present in this. So this is just one outcome to voice, and there's two others, which I find interesting here, because there's different, again, this is kind of getting back to this, what is the main question of whether is it partnership as an institution or is it collaborative leadership. These two institutional supports are important for two paths to voice, but for the third one, they're non-existent, or it's kind of a negation of the set. So they're not there in that case. So the openness is and empowering. So those for voice 3, that path, there are only two instances. Those are the only two instances of leadership there. And then what I find interesting for the COVID-19 response is that there's two paths to that as well. So this is kind of voice during crisis, right? So it could be that all of the schools have, they have the presence of partnership, they have presence of district support, as well as openness, empowering. So all of the leadership variables, as well as the institutional variables. So that makes sense, right? But then the one that surprised me was the second path to COVID-19 response. In this, the only there were certain cases, so cases of school, there were certain schools that only had district level support and nothing else. That still led to a positive school level response, which I found interesting and kind of counterintuitive. So that's kind of getting back to my thought about, are the institutions just that important or as necessary as the school level conditions? As you can see across voice equation 2 and voice path 3, it seems like empower is presence in has presence in both, as well as openness to voice. So both of these paths have
1 minute left.
I'm sorry, say that again, Mingwei?
1 minute.
Oh, 1 minute. Okay, good. I'm just about to finish up. So essentially what I'm saying here, and I'm probably doing a bad job of explaining this because I've used QCA before, but this is kind of a new way to present these data, is that there's 3 ways to get to positive voice, and a handful of them, or 2 of them, experience mostly leadership attributes and conditions, and as well as partnership, and 1 actually only has voice, leadership attributes. So again, this is this debate between whether it's collaborative leadership or institutional partnership. I think you can explain that they both complement each other, but at least with when there's during a time of crisis and COVID, it seems like district support is definitely necessary. And again, that's kind of my assessment from this analysis, is that district strategic level support is necessary to address issues around the pandemic and crisis, maybe less so for general issues around voice and collaboration that don't have to deal with a crisis. It also kind of emphasizes the need to focus on unit and school level structures and processes around partnership, because there were both unit, school level conditions or voice may occur beyond or without full strategic support from the district, which we saw with the kind of the circles being in some of those cases that showed voice. And then partnership structures and processes are sufficient for voice, but they are likely complemented by aspects of collaborative leadership, and especially empowerment of employees, because that's where we saw the most cases had actual presence of empowering leadership. I'll just leave it there. I have next steps, but I don't want to run over time. If I'm happy to answer questions afterwards.
Okay, thanks, Justin. Now we have the last presentation by Hua Liu from Renmin University. The title of the paper is Managerial Perceptions of Employee Value and Adoption of High Involvement Work Practices.
Can you hear me, Professor?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hua Liu. It's my great pleasure to present my research today. I will talk about the effective of managerial perceptions of employee participation on the adoption of high involvement work practice because of MPEPV and the adoption of HIWP for short. As we know, much of the literature has discussed work practice, but the research on employees' work practice in China is limited. The formalization of employee participation in China is a serious problem. So our research goal is to study employee participation, especially the genuineness in China. Through the research, we found MPEPV has different effects on HIWP presence and HIW genuineness. MPEPV has a positive and a significant impact on HIWP genuineness. Another finding is that private-owned enterprise has a positive effect of MPEPV and on HIWP genuineness than state-owned enterprises. About our research to study the adoption of HIWP in China, because different from other countries, HIWP in China, there is a problem formalization in China. So our study is to reflect China's HIWP adoption through HIWP presence and HIWP genuineness. Before we do empirical research, let's first understand the background of China. In Western countries, before the 1970s, enterprises implemented standard productions. However, with the transformation of production technology, enterprises, especially manufacturing enterprises, need to improve the motivations and initiatives of employees and adopt a flexible production model. Under the background, enterprises began to adopt HIWP. Different from Western countries, in the 1960s and the 1970s, China mainly used the traditional manual production and the workers' technique level was high. On the other hand, China has a socialist economy and the government advocates and employee participation. Therefore, there was a high level of employee participation in enterprises at that time. With the advance of reform and opening up, China has begun to implement standards production. The management module of manufacturing enterprises is characterized by high-interest control. Due to the level of production technology, enterprises cannot do without the participation of employees. However, due to the influence of traditional environmental and political environment, the employee participation of state-owned enterprises does not work, and there are formalization problems. So, in comparison, larger private enterprises and formally funded enterprises may have HIW genuineness due to production needs. Therefore, our objective is to study why there is HIW genuineness in China. Previous literature has studied the role of managerial ideologies, beliefs, or values on the adoption of work practice. A large number of empirical studies have found that managers' attitude is a key variable when enterprises decide to choose the adoption of work practice. The conclusion has been verified in Canada, the United States, New Zealand, and other countries. Compared with other countries, Chinese CEOs tend to have more control over their companies, and therefore have a stronger influence in shaping firm practices. So according to the strategy choice module emphasizes the importance of managerial ideology. They believed that employers' decision to adopt specific strategies and practice were more explained by their ideologies. So we predict that MPEP will also impact the adoption of HIWP. Combined with the reality of China, we propose these 6 hypotheses. The first one is enterprises with different enterprise ownership have different impact on managerial perceptions of MPEP. The individual characters of CEO will have different impacts on MPEP. The third one is the MPEP has a positive influence on HIWP presence, and MPEP and also MPEP has a positive influence on HIW genius. We further studied the firm ownership. We believed that private owner enterprises had a positive effect of MPEP on HIW genuineness, the state-owned enterprises, and foreign invested enterprises has a positive effect of MPEP on HIW genuineness than state-owned enterprises. About the data, we use China's Chinese employer and employee matched survey. About this survey, which is have 7 wheels and 8 are covering 6 cities, including 301 enterprises. And after we clear the data, the final sample includes 293 enterprises. Considering that HIWP presence and HIWP HIWP in China has two situations. So we use for the dependent variable, we use 2 measures of HIWP adoption. The first one is HIWP presence, and the second one is about HIW genuineness. We use the 2 survey questions to measure the independent variable about the managerial perceptions of employee participation value. Considering that HIWP presence and HIW genuineness are filled in by employees, we aggregated the data at the individual level of employees to the organizational level of analysis. For the the mean standard deviations and for the variables used in the study are reported in the table below. In order to understand MPEP, we examine 8 influence factors. We found that private enterprises had an impact on MPEP, but the individual characters of CEOs have no impact on MPEP. So we further studied the MPEP on the effect of the adoption of HIWP. The main relations of interest are examined by using SUR model. We regress the HIWP presence and HIWP genuineness in 3 steps. The results shows that the cases with the predict result MPEPV has a significant positive impact on HRW genes. In model 6, the addition in model 3, the last one, the addition of interaction term about the product of MPEPV and HRWP genes, but with significant positively impact the relationship between MPEPV and HRW genes. But we found that MPEPV had no effect on HRW presence. The results partially supported our hypothesis. Through in vitro research, all our predictions are partially supported. The first one, we found the formalization of employee participation in China, and the private-owned enterprise has an impact on MPEPV. And MPEPV has a positive and significant impact on HRWP genes. We also found that private-owned enterprise have a positive effect of MPEPV on HRW genes than state-owned enterprises. However, our research has some limits. We will make further improvements in the future. The first, our results are only based for a limited sample of Chinese enterprises. This may limit the universality and portability of our results. Secondly, from the perspective of methodology, we use cross-sectional data. It is difficult for us to establish a clear causal and directional relationship between MPEPV and HRW genes. So we will further to study it. That's all my report. Thank you for your listening.
Okay, thank you, Hua. Now we have about 12 minutes left for questions and answers. So for people who have a question, please, you may raise hand, use the raise hand function to raise your hand, or you can directly ask the question or make comments. Okay, Michael Hiller.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I'm a follower of Justin Vinton's work, and I have a specific question for him. In terms of the conclusions that you were drawing today from your QCA analysis, do you have a few moments or anecdotes from your interviews that crystallizes and maybe makes a little bit more vivid what the analysis was finding?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, in the K-12 Partnership Industry Council that Saul helps run, right before this, we spoke about this with another colleague of ours from the school district, who's a teacher. And one of the things that came up in the interviews, it's a common theme, and this plays out in the truth table analysis, is the relationship between the middle manager principal and the school union rep. They're visible and influential in the school. And from my interviews, it seems like if that was not present, it was very difficult to create buy-in at the school level. But if it was, there were times in specific schools where that just having that was part of, could not only help partnership, but also kind of made school, like the district level support I was talking about, with support from the union president as well as from the superintendent. If one of those was missing and you still had that strong relationship at the school, in many cases that, was sufficient enough to have employee voice and teacher voice at the school level. So that's just one example. I mean, any type of, so the kind of question that and a lot of what the feedback I heard was, I'm already collaborative, or I have been collaborative even before we implemented partnership. But there were some, principals that said like, yeah, this has made me rethink how I address decisions or approach decisions. Like maybe that would just be something I would say, hey, I'm going to answer that, but now I'm going to, look for support or ask my union rep to see if someone knows something about whatever issue we're trying to tackle here, and bring them in. So that kind of empowering leadership also really did kind of crystallize, I think, in the QCA, and it kind of really played into whether there was voice or not. I mean, like an open door policy is kind of common, but do people actually use it? The ones who actually did use it, and if teachers said like, oh yes, I always talk to them. I talk to them kind of informally all the time. I think that also was really important. And again, that's where I think this complementarity between a collaborative leadership style, so to speak, and there's different measurements of it, or being open to voice, can really complement the institution. So using the union as its own kind of vehicle for voice, but also that kind of plays into the other relationships that are existing between the principal and individual teachers, or the school union rep, or like other members of the union members at the school level. I think that really could also, they complement one another in employee voice, as well as during COVID. I know that one of the findings was interesting, that district support was probably the most necessary thing during a pandemic, which makes sense because they're the ones who are kind of pushing down what's happening at the state level, which, is out of everyone's control at that point. But there still was, a configuration, a path to having collaborative school decisions during COVID, where all of those things were present, which I think, all including with partnership and leadership. So I think this does play into this complementarity that I'm really thinking about here. And I'm happy to talk more. I can show you some quotes and stuff that will even more crystallize. I don't have them on hand, but that is a great question, because that is part of the QCA method, is going back to the cases when you're kind of unsure, if to make sure that, what the survey results or what the calibration shows you is actually what's happening. And I've done that. So
Well, I think it shows the value of that qualitative analysis to situate the broader analysis. Just one quick follow-up. So can you give an example of a particular issue, for example, during COVID, that was addressed well, especially from the point of view of the teachers, because of those complementarities you're talking about?
Yeah, so I have better examples of ones that weren't addressed well, but I do think that, district leadership stepping in, and I know one example that a case study was done from another colleague, is where, district leadership really did step in, and kind of when people were struggling and principals were struggling with communicating and to actually have these meetings, they call them school leadership teams, the principal kind of, pushed that boundary to make sure they were kind of meeting over the summer to determine what's going to happen come fall and in fall of 2020. And I think that was kind of, really important. And then there were other cases where I do remember kind of just offhand that, some principals were really confused and didn't know what was going on. They're waiting for, the superintendent or the state to figure something out. So they said to teachers, you're kind of like on your own. I empower you to kind of, you're experts and professionals. What do you think? You can kind of do things your own way, which I think was also important, and an example, again, that shows out, plays out in QCA.
Great, thank you so much.
Okay, Chris, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. So also for Justin, I was curious to know in this analysis, you make these observations and we hear these stories. Would you say that the mechanisms you've uncovered, do you think they'd be surprising to the teachers and the principals that you've talked to? Like, were there any, is there anything that maybe they said to you that using this truth table method and so forth might have resulted in kind of a line of analysis that was not in their own thinking?
Not in their own. That's a great question. I'd probably have to think on it a little bit. No, I don't think any, I mean, they're the ones experiencing that. And that's why this method is kind of so interesting, because it really brings out kind of the various perspectives from people within individual schools, especially because you are kind of so close to the cases. Surprises. I'd have to get back to you on that. That is a great question, and something that I think could be, I could definitely tease out in the interviews. Let me think about that, and I can follow up with you, because I really like that question, and I want to think on it. And if something comes to mind while I think about this, and somebody else has another question, I'm happy to respond. Thank you, though.
Okay. So I have a question for Chris. So in your model, have you considered the collaborative problem solving? Because the traditional hierarchy, managerial hierarchy, had evolved in many years already, and many horizontal structures, flexible structures have developed in companies, like project-based structure and flexible task teams. So have you considered the horizontal nature of this problem solving? And also, in many cases, there might be special task problem solving team for each project or each product or line. So what's the role of such problem solving team? If there are such problem solving team, the process might be different.
Absolutely. No, that's a wonderful question. So I would see this really, I would think about it in two ways using the model. The first would be to better represent collaboration, is to allow issues to be referred up and down, right? At the moment, there's this sort of very, very prescriptive model, right? So if I solve it, then you solve it, and so on. In a collaborative environment, there'd be a lot more, you and I look at the problem together. We decide which one of us is going to take on the problem. We iterate back and forth with each other. In other words, you'd have movement up and down or horizontally, but either way, you'd have movement between layers, however you choose to construct them. That's a very difficult problem to model analytically, like mathematically, but it is absolutely the next step. Like that is the next thing that we are looking at, and I really appreciate you raising it. Empirically, we actually see exactly that, right? The way we see it is in the optoelectronic industry context, particularly in design, not so much in manufacturing, but particularly in the product design environment, is this referral sort of between managers and senior engineers, very much ping-ponging back and forth, actually. So what you're talking about is definitely something we observe. We believe we can represent it and capture it. And the implication would be sort of a priori, again, not having written up the model formally, I think would be that if the thing that's really going to matter there again will be flexibility and referral costs. If you know, you and I are communicating a lot with each other in this collaborative environment, that cost of communication being reduced means we can collaborate more. And on the other side, if I am highly inflexible, collaboration between you and me might actually happen less, right? Because while I'm waiting for your answer, I might be idle. Whereas if I can go do something else in the meantime, you know, you and I can get the most out of each other's collaboration. So I think there's a really rich vein to tap into there. And again, really thank you for raising the question. Quickly, not to take up too much time, the other way I would sort of address this problem is, as you put it horizontally, the sort of scope question, right? Right now, I'm talking about a vertical hierarchy for a particular kind of task. Sort of what we're working on now, and it just simply wasn't ready for us to show today, is transfer across tasks. Sort of we think of it as when do I migrate from one hierarchy to another? Sort of when does the problem become a different kind of problem? But I think those mechanisms could also really nicely capture the sort of horizontal collaboration that you're talking about. So I think we can capture it. I think there's a really interesting technical approach to it. It's just that the math is going to be hard, and that's what we're doing next.
Yeah, thank you. So I have a question for Justin, but we don't know, you may not have time to answer, so we may talk later. So it seems that district leadership is so important. So I'm wondering whether you could further theorize the district leadership role, especially is it related with the corporate governance literature? So what's the role of district? It's like a board of directors or supervisor board or something. So that may further clarify this institutional role. Okay.
Yeah, that's great. And I know, Saul, we've been interested in that question of the school boards, what's their role in partnership and what role do they play in kind of creating voice and positive school and employee, teacher, union, student outcomes. So that is definitely something we're thinking about involving governance, because, public education is supposed to be democratic, at least public schools. So yes, that's a great question, Mingwei.
Okay, we are time up. Thanks everyone for participating. Bye.